Well, South African President Cyril Ramaphosa will meet with Donald Trump after the White House made the unsubstantiated claims that South Africa's white Afrikaner community is facing a genocide. Mr. Trump has cut all aid to South Africa since his inauguration as US President. So what can we expect when he and President Ramaphosa hold talks? Well, Dr. Thapelo Tselapedi is a lecturer in political and international studies at Rhodes University, and he joins me now from Johannesburg. Good to have you with us, Dr. Tselapedi. Now, firstly, what do South Africans think about Trump's repeated and unsubstantiated claims that the Afrikaner community there is facing genocide?
Hi, thank you again, and hi to your viewers. Look, I think South Africans, certainly when you look at places like your Twitter or X now, many of them are outraged, some of them find this a bit funny, but I think officially the government has made sure to always just go back to official records when it comes to police records, making sure that to always articulate the position that, well, there has not been any genocide, there has not been any thievery on the part of government or ordinary citizens of private lands or private farms of white citizens in this country, and specifically white farmers or Afrikaner farmers. So I think they've held the position legally, but for the most part, I think when you see a lot of young people, especially when they talk about this, it seems to be a joke. But I think broadly, a lot of people understand it as the broad sort of outlines of a resurgence of white nationalism in the United States.
Yes, and given the gravity of a US president saying something like that, I found it bizarre that President Ramaphosa is meeting with Trump. So how do you think this has even taken place?
Look, I think you have to understand that in South Africa, there's quite a lot of US presence of corporate entities, right? So beyond state-to-state relations, there are people-to-people relations, and I think it is those that have encouraged the president to accept the invite from President Trump to ensure that the companies in South Africa represented by the United States are secure in their presence here, that their investments are also secure. Equally, that also means for South African companies operating in the United States, and there are many. And specifically, if you look at Trump's 30% that he imposed on South Africa's trading, he did not really look or impose the 30% on some of the commodities like chrome, like manganese, those sort of commodities, which I think the United States needs. So I think it's quite important, the important economic relations between the United States and South Africa, especially because more than South Africa just being a gateway to the continent, we're an important player, not only just geopolitically, but we're an important player at least in ensuring that the United States gets its money or investments on the continent as well.
Yes, I mean, we'll talk trade in a bit, but there have been criticisms that have also come from, the South African-born Elon Musk, and we are seeing members of the Afrikaner community being given refugee visas to come to the US. So how does the South African government then approach this sort of US policy when the two leaders meet?
I can't imagine that they're happy with it because it validates certain narratives in the United States. But of course, at the same time, I don't think the South African government can stop any person wanting to leave the country on the basis that they feel threatened for this and that other issue. Certainly, there are issues around criminality. Crime is a problem in the country, and I think crime does affect everybody, not just white Afrikaner minorities. But certainly, South Africa is not going to stop ordinary South Africans, whoever they are, trying to leave the country. I think if you look at, as well, for a long time, AfriForum, the civil society organizations that has been agitating for white sort of Afrikaner claims and interests, has been talking about this, talking about a genocide for a long time, I think. And I think what has happened is that sort of narrative in South Africa by AfriForum has found favor in some of the domestic discourse in the United States, of course, represented by the Republican Party.
Yes. Now, one analyst has described President Ramaphosa's visit as a very high-risk strategy, not least because, the U.S. had also expelled South Africa's ambassador to Washington. And we know that Ramaphosa has been described as a master negotiator, and he had that role in aiding Nelson Mandela. What do you think he might be able to achieve when he gets there with the Trump administration?
Look, I think what's important to understand is that South Africa is a middle-income country. And in many ways, it has to straddle the line between the East and the West, between the United States and China. And I think President Cyril Ramaphosa, like you said, is sufficiently poised to navigate that. I think the South African government would not ideally want to engage the falsehoods around genocide, falsehoods around thievery of land, and so on. I think ideally they want to position themselves as deal makers. And I think there's common ground there for President Trump and President Ramaphosa to engage on issues around economic diplomacy. So I think without the falsehoods on issues of genocide and land thievery going on, I think there's a real chance for them to engage on economic diplomacy that may be beneficial to all concerned.
Yes, you spoke about commodities exports earlier. What do you think President Ramaphosa will put on the table for a very transactional president like Donald Trump?
Look, I think one of the biggest issues is definitely AGOA. Obviously, given the tariffs imposed, AGOA is effectively null and void. I think that there needs to be an engagement on that front, how to then have some sort of arrangement or trade agreement that benefits that sector of people between both countries. That's going to be a big issue. And certainly around engaging on issues of what is BRICS for South Africa, what does BRICS mean for South Africa in terms of its own development, in terms of issues around constitutional democracy. I think that's going to be a discussion. And I think the president would have to obviously navigate that. Like I said earlier, South Africa is a middle-income country, and I think South Africa must be able to properly navigate the East and West that seemingly is a problem. Because right now, South Africa has definitely entered the crosshairs of the United States and its own ambition with China.
Yes, and some reports are also saying out of Washington that Trump will be seeking an exemption for U.S. companies from laws that require equity ownership by disadvantaged groups. Is there something you think might eventuate and a concession that the President Ramaphosa might give to the U.S.?
Look, man, there have been concessions before, especially for foreign-owned companies. It's not new. We've seen that for VW in terms of skills development into the country. We've seen that for Microsoft as well into the country. That would not be new. I think it's important to also take note that actually Elon Musk never formally applied to ICASA, the regulatory body tasked with ensuring the telecommunication sector is kept to abreast. So he's never made that formal application, and I think he needs to make that formal application. What I do think Elon Musk and them are doing is trying to find a sort of alternative political process whereby they do not have to juridically enter into the space of issues around equity. But I think there's a lot of space for Elon Musk and Starlink to enter South Africa. You will look at Starlink in Japan. There was a local partnership that they entered into as well. So I think it goes to say that Starlink and the United States broadly must be able to respect South African laws. South Africa is a sovereign country, similar to Japan.
Do you think there may be any movement, might there be any movement from President Ramaphosa on that point of South Africa bringing that case to the International Court of Justice on claims that there is genocide happening in Israel? Do you think that Donald Trump might be able to influence President Ramaphosa to perhaps force a change in that?
Oh, I see. No, that's a hard no. I think the ANC, if you understand South Africa through the ANC's diplomatic presence and diplomatic history, there's no way that the ANC is going to let that go. You will remember that the first president, Nelson Mandela, post-1994, articulated that our struggle is tied to the Palestinian struggle. So I think what Ramaphosa has done is really represent a strong genealogy of ANC understanding of international politics. And I don't see an opportunity for Donald Trump to strong-arm Cyril Ramaphosa on this issue. I think there may be other issues they can negotiate or concede or give ground to, but certainly not that issue, given already the judgments that have been passed, in fact, at the ICJ.
Okay, Dr. Thapelo Tselapedi, really appreciate your analysis and insights. Thank you so much.
Thank you.